computer. Okay, we still have a few minutes. Vanessa, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Oh, good. Nice to hear. So your other classes are going okay as well?
Uh, yeah, it's not that bad.
Hmm. Okay,
It's pretty good.
good. So you're cautious, but you're optimistic. It's nice. Jenny, how about you? How's life with you? Busy? With classes, with work, with family, or all three? All of the above? All of the above. Okay. All right. That's life in the fast lane. Let's hope we will be out of it at least a year from now. Okay. Let's see. Share the screen. Right. Okay, good. Let's start with looking at the blackboard for this week, like I promised. Any activity at the end of chapter 6. I'm looking to see page 179. Okay. Any of these three activities that are here are eligible for you as activities. I have actually posted them just to be on the safe side. So you can do either of them. You can write the summary and maybe ask some questions about today's lecture or anything else. This chapter is something that you can easily relate to, a lot about surveys and polls and questionnaires and stuff like that. And you're all very familiar with that. So one of the activities is asking you to find a poll and classify items by type there. So like I said, from this point on until we finish the book, another uh, 6 weeks or so, any learning activity at the end of the chapter is eligible. So you go, you choose, you write, you create a new thread in your discussions here on Blackboard, answer the questions, do the activity, and that's going to be your participation points. I know that I've been like a broken record. I keep saying that not everybody is doing it. You guys, I'm looking at who is with me today. Most of you are really good. Uh, Romain, your Gmail account is not working. Whatever I send you gets bounced back to me. So you may want to tell me which email I should use. Maybe it's a different Gmail now. All right. Then today we are in week 7, chapter 6. We are doing the first 8 pages. It's a funny way. I wish Morling had this chapter broken into 2 and given us more stuff to work with. But that's what it is. So yeah, that's the one, Remain, and it's not working. It says there is no acceptance or something like that. So I may have to switch to your CIX account to make sure that you get the stuff. Next week, we will finish chapter 6 by looking at observations, and we will spend most of the time on Thursday talking about assignment 2, but we will spend maybe the first half hour doing an exercise on interviews, surveys. Because, like I said, I hope you guys are thinking about it. What is it that you will do as your assignment too? Because on Thursday, we will start looking at the observation plan. I still assume that most of you are going to do an observation. But again, if you decide to do a survey, you have to talk to me no later than Thursday because the time is very short to do this assignment. What else? Let's look. You're going to do your quiz 3 on chapter 6, due next Monday, October 19th, and it will be testing you on the entire chapter 6 just because it's so short. As always, there will be 8 multiple choice questions and 2 short answer questions, but the time will be 45 minutes. So you're going to get 15 additional minutes to make sure you can accommodate short answer questions. All right, then you have to answer the short answer question in full. If it gives you 3 questions, you have to provide 3 answers, not just one. Okay, what else? Oh, good. You're welcome, Jeremiah. Most people said last time that the problem was not the questions, the problem was time management. So let's make it a little easier on you. After this quiz 3, there will be 2 more, and you're done with quizzes. There's only 5 of them, plus city, which you did very first week of the course. Good. Does anybody have any logistic questions that I need to address before we move on to chapter 6? Now would be the good time.
Doctor,
Mhm.
is the quiz more like quiz one or is it more like quiz two? I
Smart.
mean,
Yeah.
is it hard like quiz two or is it easy like quiz one?
What do you mean by hard, Rita? It's uh, quiz 2 wasn't that difficult. From what I hear, it was lack of time. So the level of difficulty is going to be approximately the same. I don't write these questions, I just take them directly from the test bank. The reason why I can't write them is because I test you before I lecture. So I can't include anything that you haven't heard yet. So I'm constrained by the fact that I can only ask you questions about the material in the textbook. And I think, Vanessa, correct me, it was you, right, who said that had we talked about the scales of measurement before quiz 2, it would have been much easier for you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so, but that's not the point that um, these questions, scales of measurement, for example, are not presented well in the textbook. They are. It's just you didn't do too well on learning. But it's not always easy because one of the good things and simultaneously bad things about this textbook is that it's actually very short. It's a thin book, right? If you look at many other research methods books, especially the ones we used on the past, they have 500 pages or 600 pages. On the one hand, it's bad because who's going to read 600 pages? On the other, it explains things a bit better because there is more stuff, there is more exercises, there are more explanations, things like that. So my advice to you is, as always, read the book carefully. Don't, if you still use your highlighter, throw it out. Highlighters don't work. Instead of highlighters, you have to elaborate on the material. Well, the problem is it takes time, and you guys are short on time like everybody else. But I'm selfish in saying that you should prioritize your work for this class because it is foundational for anything that you will be doing in psychology. Doing well in this class will allow you to use less time, less prep time in other classes. So, yes, put in a little bit more time. Read the textbook again without highlighting. Stop. It has like all the books, it has little sections. I'm looking to see what I can show you. Uh, right. For example, here's page 168. That's right after where we will stop today. Here is this whole section called, what is it called? Check your understanding. All right. So answer these questions. If you understand them, can answer them, you're prepared for the quiz. The other, so this is point number one, elaborate engagement with the material, not plain mindless reading with a highlighter. That doesn't work. As a cognitive psychologist, take it from me, I know. The second one is when you are looking at the multiple choice question, have a piece of paper with you, cover the answers. Try to answer the question without looking at the multiple choices, because under many circumstances, the multiple choices could be misleading. They will breed this false sense of familiarity. You say, yeah, I remember. But for multiple choice questions to work, it's often not the only one that's correct, but it's the one that's the best, that fits the description of the question best. So it's not a trick, it's just how multiple choice questions work. So if you do these two, you should be okay. Plus, you have time that you didn't have. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. All right. So let's move on to, stop sharing this, and let's move on to our slides. Where are we? Here we are. Okay. So we are literally doing 8 pages. So hopefully it shouldn't be that difficult. But again, like I said, surveys and polls and questionnaires and things like that. These are the things you're very familiar with because you do them all the time. Just to remind you, and I'll be doing it every week now, that your assignment number 2 is due December 3rd, Thursday by 4 p.m. That is half hour before the class. It has to be submitted by the group leader on the Blackboard the way you did it with assignment 1. Just to remind you, I had this problem with 2 groups because I started grading assignment 1, which I hopefully will finish this weekend. The 2 groups submitted the assignment 1 in the Pages format. That's a Google program that is like Word, but not quite. Now, if you read my instructions carefully, it says both on the Blackboard and the instructions on paper for assignment 1 that format has to be either docs or doc for Word or PDF. Now, these 2 groups who submitted the assignment 1 in Pages are going to be the last ones I will grade, just because I don't have them. You don't want that because you would like to, I assume you would like to get to see what you got as early as possible. So, and I'm not gonna, if you don't read my instructions, I'm under no obligation to do it quickly. So the 2 groups that I emailed yesterday, one of them got back to me already. Perfect. You guys are in good shape, so you can fix a couple of things. The second group I haven't heard back from, so I don't know. But again, today is not a required class. So, okay. Um, so what we will do, we'll talk about really everything in that chapter. For now, the way this presented in the textbook is about construct validity of surveys. And I hope you remember what the construct validity is. This is whether the variables measure or the variables were measured in such a way that they represent what the researchers intended to measure. Now, remember, if we talk about association claims, we have 2 variables, so we have to assess construct validity for both. Now, with surveys, it's a little funny because for surveys, basically every question is its own variable. So if you have 10 questions, you actually are having 10 variables. Sometimes, like we looked at Rosenberg's self-esteem scale, they're designed, the questions are designed in such a way as to allow you to do what is called a composite score. So 5 questions will be, positively skewed about self-esteem. 5 will be negatively skewed about self-esteem. And you can then calculate a general score. You can calculate a composite score. It depends. But it's safe to assume that every single question in a survey, a questionnaire, or interview is a separate variable. So now for each question, you have to ask the question. You have to ask whether, if you were measuring self-esteem, does this question actually measure self-esteem, or is it something else? So the three sections that we will discuss today have to do with question formats and whether questions are well formed, well worded, that sort of linguistic approach, and then what to do to make sure that people respond accurately. And that's probably the biggest issue that we have, the surveys. Going back to our flow chart, I hope you have it nearby. I asked you to have the flow chart with you every single time. Thursday is less important because we rarely start anything new on Thursday. Tuesday is the day when you have to have it. So what we had before today was design our study with these 4 components on the right. So you have to choose participants, you have to choose your method, you have to define your variables, and select a scale that these variables will be measured on. And I already told you, not that we will be doing a lot of that, but like a preview. If you can define your variables and identify, that is your variable categorical or continuous? If it is categorical, is it measured on nominal or ordinal scale? If it is continuous, is it measured on interval or ratio scale? And the reason why we want to know that is because that's what tells us which statistical test to use. Maybe I told you before, there is no magic like a wand where you can sort of flip it in the air and say, oh, I'm going to do a t-test. No, there's absolutely no ambiguity in choosing statistical test, really, at least for our purposes. Some complex statistical analysis may be ambiguous, but not the stuff that we do. So for the stuff that we do, once you have your association claim for assignment 2, you have to have your variables defined. If they're conceptual, you have to come up with an operational definition. And then it's going to be, remember what I want you to do, really? I want you to have 2 categorical variables. Categorical variable 1 with 2 names, 2 levels, and categorical variable 2 also with 2 levels. So yes, no is a very appropriate way of identifying such variables. And once you know that, that's it. There is nothing else for you to do but to do a chi-square. That's it. It's that easy. And you don't even know how to calculate. You don't need to know how to calculate chi-square because we have, I don't know, 50 different statistical programs where you punch in your variables and voila, on the other end, you get your statistical analysis. Isn't that beautiful? There's absolutely no math involved. None. All you have to do is you have to understand what your variables are. So that was that part on the right. Now we are entering with this chapter, and we'll continue with chapter, let's see, I'm thinking, chapter 9. We will continue investigating methods. And I told you that although there are many more, we will only look at 3. We will look at observations and surveys. Observations, surveys, and interviews. We can think of them as kind of one. Or you could say observation 1, surveys and interviews 2, and experiments 3. That's it. Again, there are many other esoteric methods. There are case, and individual cases, there are complex designs, there are archival methods, and there is this and there is that. It's completely irrelevant for this class. All you need to know is these three. Let's make it three so it's easy for us to talk about. So observations, surveys, and experiments. That's it. And of these three, only experiments are the ones that are causal claims. They are the ones that have internal validity. Observation and surveys are either frequency claims, of which we're not going to be really interested in, and association claims. And that's what we will be doing to make our life easier. And it's going to be correlational design. If one variable changes, so does the other. Are they causally connected? That's a question for an experiment. And in the past, I have to say that I was much more flexible in terms of giving students a choice of the method they would want to use and a claim they would want to test. Unfortunately, what happened under these circumstances is people were very overwhelmed. And I realized that I don't need to torture you with experiments. If you would like to do experiments, please come to my 3:30 experimental psychology, cognition, and perception. There, it will be just the experiments, nothing else. And that's a holy grail of experimental psychology. So we are in this very nice fat stage of our flowchart, designing a study. Now, before we even continue, can somebody guess? Of course, you don't need to ask my permission, Jeremiah. Just do what you need to do. Come back. Can somebody guess what's going to be in I'm gonna just get some color. I don't know. How about some green for a change? What's gonna be in this box? Type in the chat or unmute yourself. Guess. What's the next stage? Go ahead,
Might
Siver.
be too. It might be too early, but I was wondering if collecting of the data. Um,
Ding, 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 ding,
okay, great,
ding. Correct.
sweet.
Yes. So once you have chosen your design, these are these four things: participants, method, variables, and measures. And here are your methods: observation, surveys, and experiments. You're ready. You are going to collect your data. Fantastic. And that's why we will have one more week from this Thursday until next one to finalize all your design participants and so on and so forth. And as of October 22nd, you're going to go into the data collection mode. Of course, you could always ask me questions, but really there's nothing that I can do but wait for you to finish. Excellent. So let's let's clear all the drawings and move on. Get rid of this. Right. Okay, so I'll be using the word survey, but you can think of other options like interview or a poll or questionnaire. All of these things are just different, I would say, modes, but the same idea. So you're asking questions from your participants, and they can be, different groups. They can be in a program, post-test, pre-test, any kind of stuff. Your survey could be very, very short. One question. That's what we normally think when we do polls, right? Exit polls that will happen to us quite soon. We can be standing there if people are voting live and ask them an exit survey question. Who did you vote for? That's a one question. Then there's one answer. Or it can be very, very elaborate, sometimes up to 300 questions. Of course, that's a little bit of a overkill. Normally, we get 50 to 100 questions, And of course, they can be given on paper, the way we used to do it in the past. They can be given over the phone, also, mostly in the past, because very few people have landlines now, so you can call them and ask questions. And if somebody calls you on your cell, you think it's a spam and you don't answer. Or the most typical way of doing it now is over the internet. Sometimes you even seek to participate in the survey, sometimes they come after you. And if you're lucky, if you're doing an interview, you can do an interview in person, or you can do an interview on Zoom or on Skype or in Google Hangouts, whatever platform you may be using. The idea is still the same. You ask questions and you get answers. So, what are the types? Basically, we do have some relatively well established distinction between questionnaires that are usually written. You can send somebody a questionnaire and ask them to fill it out, or the interview when we actually talk to people, and we often have the questions prepared ahead of time, which is good because it allows us to be very efficient. Sometimes we have to be spontaneous and ask questions based on our interviewee's answer to the previous question. And of course, we can ask people things like the age and education level. These are called demographic questions. They're really easy, kind of boring. I mean, you don't have to think hard when you answer them, versus questions that have to do with beliefs, attitudes, and values. And these are the ones that we do care about. And they are the ones that are really difficult to collect and work with. And mostly these are the ones that we will be talking about today and on Thursday. So remember that these are correlational designs. That is, these are association claims. There is no manipulation of independent variable. If you ask somebody who they voted for, you're not manipulating it in any meaningful way. You're just allowing people to tell you. Of course, they can lie. That's a separate story. But you're not saying, if you were blah, 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 would you vote for? No, you're just asking them, who did you vote for? And this is a measured variable, not manipulated. So in addition to the fact that you have to remember that your variables can be categorical or continuous, you also have to remember that your variables can be manipulated or measured. And we can forget about manipulation for a while until we get to chapter 9, which will be another couple of weeks. All right? Measured, measured, measured. Your two variables are measured. You're not manipulating them. So if you're looking at your potential assignment 2 questions, one categorical variable, another categorical variable, both of them are measured. None of them is manipulated. So very classic one is gender, right? We have some philosophical ways of dealing with non-binary genders today, but again, that's besides the point. Gender, from the biological point of view, is binary. You are either male or female. These are names. It's a categorical variable, and you just measure. Well, I guess you could, in a sort of mock experiment, you could say, "Now, John, of course you are a guy, but pretend that you're a woman." You could do that, but that's not what's interesting, because John's views as a woman are very different from John's view, or maybe actually the same as John's view as a guy. So you just measure. And again, we facts about demographics are easy because people will just give us the age, the socioeconomic status, education level, number of children in the family, whatever. But what we care about is the beliefs and attitudes. That's where psychology shines, simultaneously pulling us down as well. So how do we go about designing a survey or a questionnaire, like I said, I'll be using these terms interchangeably. Um, just like your assignment one or your assignment two, you have two things to have in mind. One is the format. In our assignments, the format is the APA format, and content. Um, like I said, I'm still reading, so I'm not going to comment on your assignment one, but it looks like that format is relatively easy and content is really, really, really hard. So you could leave, if you're doing a questionnaire, the questions of format to the end and focus on the content. Okay, because it's a subject matter. What is it that you want people to tell you about, right? And format is more about the linguistic qualities of your questionnaire, how they look on the page. Do you want to break between pages? Do you want to have double spacing? APA doesn't tell us anything about how you would design your questionnaire. It's only about lab reports and essays. And there are other ways of thinking about format as well. Do you want it in color? Do you want images? If you have ever created a resume for yourselves to apply for a job, you know that you should not be putting any images because they distract from the content, things like that. Now, the point that we want to focus on is that the questions, or I call them items here on this questionnaire, on any questionnaire, can be either open-ended or close-ended. Why the D is missing here? It should be closed-ended. I don't know why. Okay. So open-ended is something when we don't really know what to expect from our participants. They can say anything. So we just give them space and we give them a question where they are not, so it's not multiple choice, right? It's short answer. Hopefully they'll give us something more than one word or two words. Okay, and the closed-ended questions obviously are like multiple choice. You're very familiar with those. You get A, B, C, D choices, and these are the alternatives, and they're usually ordered when it comes to questionnaires, not necessarily for the multiple choice questions. But again, the format is something that you are very intimately familiar with in your classes. Ah, there's also those partially open-ended questions where you would give people multiple choices and then you'll give them an option called other. Because sometimes they give you options and you're not sure which one of them to choose because something else, like on many of these questionnaires, they ask you where you got the information from and they give you, a colleague or an email or a newsletter or something, and maybe you just stumbled upon it somehow. So you want to choose other. And then they say, please specify. So you tell them, oh, I was just, going through some brochures and I found your brochure or something like that. So the open-ended questions are kind of nice. And we often start with them because if we're not sure what possible answers are going to be, we'd rather get them all and then perhaps use these answers to create a closed-ended questionnaire next. So let's do this first one, which is easy. So can you do a mixed format? Of course. Not only you can, but most questionnaires actually are in the mixed format. Some questions are open-ended, others are closed-ended. But let's try the first one. So why don't you guys, oops, go back. Chat and put in the chat your open, why I keep doing this, your answer to this first one. Name the public figure you admire the most. And this open-ended question doesn't tell us whether this public figure is a politician, a musician, a writer, go away, or anything, whether this person is living or dead. It's just, who do you think is somebody you admire, would be a potentially good role model for you? So type in your answer in the chat. I really can't think of anyone. Well, Vanessa, think. Are you, it is hard. Are you into sports? Are you into music? Are you into reading? A book character? Oh, no, I don't think so, Jeremiah. No, let's see if you that's okay. Let's see if you can think of somebody who was an actual person, either who's still with us or who died. But okay, Neil deGrasse Tyson, like, okay, great. Tyson is an astronomist who has become a spokesman for science and who talks about space and many other things and educates children. He's the director of Hayden Observatory in the Museum of Natural History in Manhattan and also affiliated with Columbia. Yes, a very interesting person. Okay, Rita, can you name somebody who you admire?
Justin Baldini. I like he raises awareness about children cancer.
Okay, maybe not somebody who would everybody would know, but that's okay. You know because you're following this person. Perfect. Jasmine, what about you?
I'm sorry, but nobody really comes to mind.
Do you like
I
music? Do you like
n- no, I don't know. Like I don't I don't really look up to anybody. Like other than like my parents or cousins or family members, I don't really have anybody. I don't know if that's bad.
okay, well, my question was the public figure, which means that neither of your family members qualify. They're not public figures.
Exactly. Like I don't have a public figure that I really look up to.
But maybe you can think about history
If
or
I could think about it by the end of class, I'll let you know.
okay, so Jeremiah tells us about his mother. Okay, that's good. But again, that's not a public figure. Um, I'm sure most of you guys took Core 100, perhaps somebody in the history of this country, or if you come from a different country. I used to have a couple of Indian students in one of the previous classes, and they all said Mahatma Gandhi. For them, Mahatma Gandhi was that kind of person that you, not necessarily a role model, Machiavelli, Jeremiah. Okay, Machiavelli is an interesting person, yes. Should he be considered a person to admire? I don't know. Thomas, what about you?
Uh, Maybe I was watching sports.
Yeah,
Who?
well, name somebody. Are you a football
Um,
fan?
yeah, yeah. Well, sort of. Just watching the NBA finals. Um,
Basketball, all right. What's your uh, NBA player that you admire the most?
I think.
Watch.
I guess it's gonna be LeBron.
Okay, LeBron. It's good enough. Thank you. I see Eileen says Gabby Douglas. Who is Gabby Douglas? Eileen, I actually don't know. So can you please illuminate
She's an Olympic gold medalist for the U.S.
in which sports?
Gymnastics.
Ah, okay, now that rings the bell. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Alien. Yeah, that makes sense. So you see, if we were to create a closed-ended questionnaire, we would be at a loss. I mean, who do we put? A politician, a musician, a basketball player, a gymnast, um, maybe historical figure like Niccolo Machiavelli. Interesting, right? That's why open-ended questions can be exciting but difficult. The next one is affirmative action. Does anybody know what affirmative action is? Well, affirmative action is a preference in choosing candidates. Let's say we'll take a job. Now, there are special categories that are called protected categories of people. If you belong to one of these categories, then you have preference in being hired. So affirmative action, let's say in terms of even a few years ago, was very applicable to women. So if there's a job opening and there are several candidates, maybe three or four, and two of them are women and two of them are men, then if the company follows the affirmative action, which is a federal mandated policy, a woman would be preferred to a man. Do you know what the affirmative action category is on Staten Island? Who enjoys special privileges on Staten Island? Oh, you don't know, guys. It's Americans of Italian descent. So if your family is from Italy, whatever few generations before you, and you still identify as an American of the Italian descent, you can be under the affirmative action. If there are other candidates applying for a job and you are Italian American on Staten Island, you will be subject to affirmative action and the job will be yours. But of course, all the candidates have to be approximately the same. So if somebody is much, much better and this person is a white male, affirmative action is not going to be helpful. Okay. Here's the problem, right? If we give people a way to answer this question, whichever way they want, and you could say, I really don't want to support affirmative action because, I mean, then what do you do with this? How do you code it? How do you categorize it? It takes a lot of time. So we'll actually have a look at an example on Thursday. So just have it in mind that although open-ended questions are important, especially as a first step, they're not very easy to work with. Much, much easier, of course, to work with closed-ended questions. So when you create these open-ended questions, you have to do that because you can't have all possible answers, or maybe that range is so big, like my first example of a public figure. We also sometimes do that because we don't want to put sort of the words into our participants' mouths. If we formulate a question in a certain way, they will try to guess what we want to say. We especially care about open-ended questions when the question has sort of linguistic flavor. We want to know what kind of words will people use when they say, I object to affirmative action because it is unfair, or because it's stupid, or because it's archaic, or because there are more women than men, and whatever they want to say, right? We want to hear their voice. With the closed-ended questions, much, much easier. If we already know what to expect, this is the example of narcissistic personality inventory that comes from the textbook. You can ask people to mark one of the two in one. So I really like to be the center of attention, or it makes me uncomfortable to be the center of attention. So the first one is reflective of narcissistic personality, while the second one is supposedly not. Do the same about two. I'm going to be a great person versus I hope I'm going to be successful. Okay, much easier, right? And think about if you were then to code, tabulate these answers. It's so much easier to say the person chose one or the person chose two, as opposed to going through a whole response in the open-ended question. All right. The other format that's very typical, and I'm sure you know it, you already saw it many, many times. It's something that we called a Likert scale. A Likert is a name of the psychologist from 1923 to about mid-30s, who came up with this rating scale. And the typical Likert scale has only 5 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. And the wording is strongly agree, agree, I don't know, neutral. So strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. And our participants are required to circle one of these three. If you have 7, if you have 3, if you have different wordings, these will be Likert type scales. But the idea is the same. The question here is an example from Rosenberg's self-esteem inventory that we talked about many, many times. So here I'm able to do things as well as most other people. If your self-esteem is high, presumably you'll be choosing 4 or 5 versus somebody whose self-esteem is not so high, maybe choosing 2 or 3. You also will notice that people uh, often don't like the endpoints. Fewer people will select 1 or 5. Most people will select 2 or 4, but there is also a bunch of people who don't want to be committed to anything, and they will consistently select 3. So sometimes the researchers want to avoid this, I don't know, neutral, and they just get rid of 3. So you have 1, 2, sort of 4 and 5, but they will look like 1, 2, 3, and 4 with strongly disagree, disagree, agree, strongly agree. Done. Um, Here is your favorite website, Rate My Professor. Um, there are 3 dimensions that one could rate a particular instructor on: easiness from 1 to 5, helpfulness, useless to helpful, and clarity from incomprehensible to clear. And again, you can think of when you read these, when you look at the scales, and of course there are also comments, you want to know whether these choices were actually justified by the student who chose to rate instructor this way or that way. You guys do a lot of that too when you have to fill out your evaluations at the end of the course. Of course, we as faculty also judge you by giving you certain grades. So again, very, very common way of think about your GPA. Of course, we don't have 5, but we have 4, and sometimes even higher than 4, and 3, which is equivalent to a B, and so on. There are many ways of interpreting the results of a Likert scale. That comes from this Latin word for scala, and that's just basically steps, a staircase, right? So the idea is that the distance between each step is the same as between the next one and the one above it. Again, just a standard of measurement. It's not always easy to say that, because if it were 1 to 2 is the same as 2 to 3 as the same as 3 to 4, we would think of that as a continuous variable, and we would use an interval scale. But it's a very tricky question whether 1 to 2 is the same as 2 to 3 and 3 to 4, because we can't really come up with an operational definition in such a way as to be sure that the intervals are equal. We don't have to worry about it when we have real numbers like inches or feet. With attitudes and beliefs, yes, we create numbers, but there's no way we can say that they are equal. That's why most Likert scales, with very, very few exceptions, are always ordinal and never interval, always categorical and never continuous. So don't be fooled by numbers. Numbers are not meaningful in that way. Okay, so there's tons of examples. I'm just going to show you maybe one or two. We have lots of scales where we ask people about all kinds of public policy issues, about schools, about public transportation. Think about living in New York. Everybody has an opinion on the way our subways work. We also do lots and lots of scales for products. Now, if you buy something on Amazon and you really hate it, you may go and say, gee, this is 1 star. This is so bad. Or if you really, really like it, you may go and say, wow, this is the best product I've ever had. Right? So again, something that's very common. There's something else where you could, instead of using numbers, you would actually use an actual number line. And you just ask people to click somewhere. Again, very typically used with products. So if you bought a particular type of headphones, they will ask you to rate them as either terrible or somewhere in the middle or excellent. So putting your check mark right here gives a score of 5.2, which seems to be leaning toward excellent end of the scale. Okay. Again, and especially even a few years ago when you would buy a product, it would have this piece of paper warranty inside, and some of them would have these kinds of scales in them. Or I'm just giving you all kinds of examples. Instead of giving them a number line, you can actually ask them to use words: poor, good, very good, excellent. Or that's what we do when you guys ask me to write a letter of recommendation for you for your grad school application or your job. For grad school applications, we often get questions like this. They say, compared to the other students in that class or in your career, how does the student rate in terms of motivation for graduate work? So I can say, if I say this person is below 50%, that's the kiss of death, right? Because this person is never going to be a good graduate student. If I say top 1%, well, that's exceptional. I mean, how many 1% students do we have? So most people will go between top 5 and top 10, depending on how good the student was in their opinion. But nobody expects you to sort of go below 50. If that's going to be the case, don't ask that person to write a letter for you. The letter has to be good. The Europeans write very different letters from us, but still. What else? Again, this is the person's name, Reinces Likert. He started in 1923 and then continued sort of working with his scale until early 30s. Okay, and so the idea is that nothing is sort of gray. It's either good or bad, either favorable or not so favorable. And these are the 5 possibilities. So here my neutral option is undecided. And you can use words like agree slightly and disagree slightly. But again, it has to be 5, and it has to have these endings strongly at both ends, with a neutral option in the middle. The example that we have in the textbook is the example of cannabis use. This question was on the ballot in New Jersey a few years ago. It was passed by the popular vote. That is, people who voted agreed with 3. So marijuana does some people a lot of good, but when it went to the legislature in the state of New Jersey, it was not passed. So legislature decided that legalizing recreational use of marijuana is not a good idea for New Jersey. It's totally fine in Massachusetts. It's totally fine in Colorado. It's fine in Washington, not DC, but state of Washington. You go to Seattle and you see these trucks all over the place where you can buy your cannabis chocolates, or you can buy, cannabis drinks and CBD products that are stronger than perhaps what we expect them to be. The problem with some of these, and that's been in the news, that if you buy, let's say, a chocolate like this, you have to look at the back and see how many servings are there. Because if you think that this entire chocolate is something that you can eat right away, in 40 minutes you'll be tripping like there is no tomorrow, because the serving was 1/6 of that bar. So there are issues, but many states decided that recreational use of marijuana is not a problem. And again, it was presented to people in questionnaires like this. And on a referendum, there might be just one question in the ballot saying, "Do you support recreational use of marijuana?" And you say yes or no. Okay, and that's the simplest way to get people's opinions without going into details, right? Now, in terms of format, I mean, you can arrange it in the way that it makes people's life easier, right? So here is a way of just putting a check mark in between parentheses for each of the questions. You have to spell out the choices so people remember what is it that you're asking them to do. But it makes it very easy for you to then go in and do your checks, as opposed to circling and remembering that 2 is agree slightly and 4 disagree slightly. So format, of course, can make a huge difference. Um, so when do we use closed-ended questions? When the number of choices, multiple choices, is small, but the number of participants is large. So that's one of the reasons why multiple choice tests are so popular in high school and in college, because even if you have a class of 45 people, which is normally what we have for 200 level psych courses, it's a nightmare to grade every single question for 45 students. But if it's a bubble sheet, again, you're very familiar with that. All you have to do is create a key bubble sheet and then run a whole batch of these questions through the machine that is in 4S 108. And you can do it. I used to do it during the break in the class and come back and give people the scores. And machine scoring is, of course, easy. And it can be thousands of participants in no time. Or if you do it in Google Forms, you collect the data, and Google will then download the data for you in the Excel format, and all you have to do is analyze. All right, so there are many good things about close-ended questions. Okay, let's look at the time. It's 5:36. Let's have a break until, let's say, 5:43. Oops, where are we? Break until 5:43 p.m. Okay, I'm here. So if anybody wants to ask me a question, do so. Okay, let's go back to where we were. We've been through this before. Let me just quickly go through that. Okay, so let's look at some of the examples of open-ended versus closed-ended questions. So let's assume that you're hiring a secretary, okay? And then you have to think of the qualities that you'll be looking for in that person. And we can give people a list like this, and we can ask them to rank. Again, this is a little archaic now because what we are looking for in secretary these days is to be technologically savvy, but in the days even 20 years ago, you might want to get somebody who has good telephone answering skills and who can talk to public and who can do clerical stuff. So you can actually rank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you can look at your candidates and see which one fits your ranking best. So how do we get these qualifications? Well, first we ask a bunch of participants to list qualities that they would look for in a secretary, and then we would create this closed-ended question answers with ranking. That will be helpful, right? What can go wrong with the survey or interview or questionnaire? Well, one of the possibilities is that if you ask questions that are kind of ambiguous or not clear or imprecise, if your language is poor, like you use ungrammatical sentences, or if you give people very long answers that they have to hold on to in their head and they can't do that, or if you have technical jargon like terms in the wording of your questions, or if you embedded them into something. So being a linguist, I appreciate good questionnaire when questions are worded correctly. So again, the example for you in the textbook is what's known as the leading questions, where you kind of lead people to a particular answer, which of course is often unintentional, but it can be used intentionally. So the example is this Gallup poll of 2006. Of course, we are 14 years later than that now. We know what happened this summer. Do you think that relations between whites and blacks will always be a problem, or that the solution will eventually be worked out? So if you look in the textbook, you'll see that 43% of people said that it's going to be always a problem. Because there's the word problem, right, in the wording of the question. So people are thinking, the researchers are asking me about the problematic nature of the race relationships. Versus the second option, where you would say relations between whites and blacks are as good as they're going to get. Now, 75% of people agreed that the racial issue is not as acute as it was in the first version, with 43% of people saying it is a problem, it will be a problem. So wording can be extremely sensitive to how people will respond, because we as humans often sort of play a game, right? We say, we know what they want me to say, and I can be nice and I can say, I will still do my job, trying to be honest, or I can play the little game. I can tell you that as a person who grew up in the Soviet Union times, that tells you how old I am. We would often play the games. We know what the system wants, and we can play around that. It's much better here. Another problem is what's known as double-barreled question. A double-barreled question means that there are two questions in one. Okay? So if here is an example, I look for main ideas as I read, and I formulate answers to questions I have as I read an assignment. Well, first of all, it's long, so it kind of taxes your working memory. But when you answer whichever your answer might be, it's not clear which of these two questions you actually are answering. Are you answering the first one? I look for main ideas as I read, 5, or I formulate answers to questions. Maybe I don't, 1. So what am I answering? Or maybe I'm answering both, right? It becomes a nightmare. So double-barrel questions have to be avoided at all costs. And it's easy. You just break them in two, right? And you create two separate questions. Double negatives. Now that's a nightmare because you have to cancel the negation in your head, and negation that is using not is difficult. It's difficult in language in general. So again, the example that is given to you in the textbook, and remember this textbook is second edition, so it's a few years old. It uses the Holocaust denial survey from 1994, where people were asked something like this: does it seem possible or does it seem impossible to you that the Nazi extermination of the Jews never happened? Okay, so now you have to think possible, impossible, never. All of this together makes it impossible, right? Makes it very difficult for a participant to mm, sort of understand the question and answer it in any meaningful way. So if you have to say something that would include a negation, you should reformulate your question in such a way that negation is not there at all. And we do have studies in psycholinguistics, which I do, where we give questions and sentences with not and negation to older participants, to people over 60, and they have problems understanding them because it's difficult. It requires the mental flexibility that's not always available to older folks. So here is again another way of doing that. Guns should never be controlled. Are you a pro-gun or against gun law person? That never throws you off. It's much easier to ask people something like gun control is a good idea. Or if they say yes, they would like to see more control over guns. If they say no, they prefer to invoke the Second Amendment, whatever they want to do. They're also just plain bad questions, right? Here is an example. Do you often feel anxious about taking a test and getting a low grade? Is it about anxiety or is it about a low grade? Both of them are sort of simultaneous. Here's my favorite. Do you never not cheat on your exams? Can somebody answer that question? Not even grammatical, right? Um, are you ruining your children's future by beating them?
I love how nobody wants to answer that question.
It was, Jasmine, it was a rhetorical question, of course. Just to remind you guys, as psychologists in training, you are supposed to be ethical, not just in this class, but in all your other classes. Otherwise, what kind of psychologist are you going to be? So you don't have to answer that. You just have to think about it. Somebody, I don't remember who it was, but somebody suggested studying spanking for assignment 1, maybe assignment 2, actually. Imagine that you ask people questions about spanking their children. What kind of answers are you going to get? Are you going to get honest answers? Hard. And here again, the wording is right. Are you ruining your children's future by spanking them? You are already making sort of a leading way of people thinking, well, if I tell them the truth, they make me feel like I'm a bad person. But I'm not a bad person, right? So using this kind of wording will result in high amount of lying on your questionnaire, which of course you don't want to get. Now, another problem with the way the questions can be presented to our participants is the question order. And this is known as the anchoring effect. So if you start with a question about women, it's just about affirmative action. Again, do you favor affirmative action programs for women? Then you're anchoring it to women. And when it comes to the next question, which has to do with racial minorities, people may be anchored to women, and they will be answering this question about racial affirmative action differently. As if you were to start the other way around, do you generally favor affirmative action programs for racial minorities? Perhaps would give you better or more objective way to assess people's ideas about affirmative action programs. Because a lot of people don't think of women as being inferior in any way to men these days, while the racial issues continue to plague our society. Now, if you ever got a message from some charity programs, or if you ever try to support public television, they will give you a choice of answers in such a way that the highest possible donation, let's say $100, will be the first one. And then, I don't know, 50 and 20 and 5. And that's anchoring again. So if they start with 100, when you get to 5, you think, well, 5 is not so bad. I will donate $5. But if the order is different, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, then you will not consider 5 as a low amount the way you would the other way. So ordering is a big issue in psychology and consumer research because of the effects it has on the following options. So in those surveys, questionnaires, where we are thinking about studying attitudes or beliefs, we have to be very careful in how we order these questions so we don't get the order effect like this. So the textbook refers to this as shortcuts. This is page 164. Okay, so let's say you're going to get another question from Rosenberg's self-esteem scale. The question is, my life is close to ideal. Well, there are 10 questions there. This is just one of them. Let's say you say, I'm so tired. I really don't want to do it. Why are they bothering me with this questionnaire? So I'm just going to go and say, I don't know, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4 for everything. Now, remember, of course, that we try to offset that by having split reliability in our questionnaires by using half of the questions that will skew you to the positive way and the other half skewing you to the sort of negative way to preclude precisely that. Now, this is also known as yay, saying when you just keep saying yes, 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 yes to everything, or no, 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 no to everything. Or it can be what's known as acquiescence in construction of surveys and questionnaires. And acquiescence is like, okay, I'll acquiesce, I'll accept whatever you want me to do, I'll say it. Because we are cognitive misers. We don't like cognitive load. We don't like to work, whether it's for free or even for pay. If we can get away with minimum of efforts, we will. So you have to be very careful in sort of creating the order of these questions that will require people to put in some efforts in reading and understanding them, as opposed to either acquiescence or naysaying or fence sitting. And fence sitting is a different way of being in the response set by always choosing the neutral one, or the one that means I don't know. I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And that is throughout the entire questionnaire, which of course is lost data. It's not going to be useful because not that you don't know, you just don't want to do it. So we have to think about what's known as encouraging accurate responses, and that's the last section of the surveys in chapter 6. All right, the other possibility, and think about it, have you ever done that, is to try to look socially desirable in your answers. Okay, so let's think about the first one. My table manners at home are as good as when I eat out in the restaurant. So let's go to participants. And you have the little toolbar at the bottom, guys, right? With yes, no. So if you agree to this statement that your table manners at home are as good as when you go out, so click yes. And if not, then click not. Let's see if you are socially desirable respondents. And, you know, table manners, I mean, do you use your fingers to push the food on the fork? Do you surreptitiously clean your teeth with your nails? Stuff like that. Go on. We have 11 people and we have 4 answers. So go to participants, and at the bottom you have the toolbar that allows you to click yes or no. All right, 6 people. I eat chicken with a fork and a knife. Okay, prefer not to answer. All right, good. Okay. I have a weird way of sitting when I eat. Like with your feet on the table, Liz. Oh, on the chair. Okay. Okay, it depends what you're eating. Well, I'll give you an example. I don't know if that's relevant, but think about it. In here, when we eat pizza, right, we eat it with our hands. That's just the way we eat pizza. If you go to Europe, Europeans eat pizza with a knife and fork. So if as an American you grab your pizza, everybody will know that you are an American because Europeans don't do that. Is that good table manner in Europe? No. Okay, good. So most of you think that your actual table manners at home are better, not as good as, oh, well, actually, no, you're saying that your table manners are as good in the house as they are in the restaurant. Okay, great. I'm going to clear this. Let's do the second one. I'm always a good listener, no matter who I'm talking to. So click yes if you agree, or click no if you disagree. Okay, so far it's equal, 3 and 3. Good. Irina, can you please vote? It's in the participants section. If you click on participants at the bottom, you get a toolbar. Do you see it? I see, Victoria. Okay, good. So if you think that you're a good listener, click yes. But if your listening skills depend, okay, good. So we have 6 people who say yes and 4 people who are being honest with us. Fantastic. Now, of course, we can always ask an additional question of our participants. We can ask them to follow up with whether they're being honest, creating a much longer questionnaire. So if we avoid questions that create that make participants uncomfortable, we may be more likely to get honest answers. So when you write questions, right, these are the goals that you should have in mind, and check your questions. Are they simple? Do you have any double barrel questions? That is 2 questions in one. What about the wording? Did you word your questions in such a way that your wording is neutral? Make sure you don't have any negative negations, uh, negative particles or words, and try to avoid a situation where people would just say, oh, I'm so tired, let me just say yes, 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 yes to everything. So it's a whole business. We even have special classes. Occasionally we run this, I think it's 320 tests and measurements it's called, where you could learn how to write good questions and become an industry psychologist who writes these surveys and conducts polls. Content, of course, is another planet. It's a very important. And so what we will do on Thursday, we will work through a little example on attitudes, well, not attitudes, on owning a pet. So if you guys have a dog or a cat, you could use yourself as a participant in this little 10-question survey that we will work with on Thursday. Or you can pretend, if you do have a pet, well, you don't, what your answers could be. So, I mean, if you study people's attitudes toward pets, what kind of questions could you ask them? What would be the topic? You don't want to go all over the place and get questions there that will have to do with, I don't know, therapeutic nature of having a pet. You're more interested in what are the pluses and minuses of having a pet. Now, this is a very interesting point now in COVID situation, because I know from some of my colleagues in Europe, when they were on strict lockdown, they actually could rent a dog, because under strict lockdown measures, you could still go out about 500 feet away from the house or apartment to walk a dog. Well, if you don't have a dog, you can't go out. So people would, on social media, would post requests whether they could rent a dog from somebody and go out with the dog. All right, so it's interesting. And these days, I think I remember seeing it somewhere. Uh, that in this country, a lot of shelters actually have been emptied out. People have adopted lots of dogs and cats because that gave them some kind of a companionship that they didn't have to worry about before COVID. Okay. So another way, and that's what you will have to do anyway, whether you're doing survey or observation, is to look at the literature. That is, you have to go to PsycInfo And you'll be surprised how many questionnaires, surveys, and polls are available. I mean, there's tons and tons and tons of stuff. And many of them have only been created once and used once and then not used again. What else? For some of the concepts that you would like to study, of course, you have to have an operational definition. What is it that you're looking at? We talked about freedom, I think, last week or maybe a week before. I mean, how do you operationalize freedom? If you're on lockdown, is your freedom uh, sort of violated because you have to sit in the house? So you can ask these kinds of questions. So when you have to do that, if you're thinking of doing a questionnaire and survey, and that's one of the reasons why I thought we should talk about it even before we talk about observation, is if anybody wants to do a questionnaire or survey for assignment 2, you need to learn about this stuff. So if you decide that's what you want to do, there is still uh, a step that is very hard to avoid, and the step is casual observation of that particular concept that you would like to study. So in a way, observation, and that's what I suggest you do while we can still do it in New York. We're not in lockdown yet, because it's the foundational method for all the other methods, including surveys and experiments. Or you can have an interview. You could talk to your family members or to your friends or to people in your group. And that's one of the ways that why you are working in groups in this class. It's because 3 heads is much better than 1 or 2. The reason why you want to do an observation first, because sometimes to come up with the options for a survey question, you actually need to know what kinds of questions you should ask to study this particular phenomenon. So if you want to study freedom, what do you want to ask? Is it about human rights? Is it about mass media? Is it about things people can do? All of these would be important steps for you to take before you can come up with a meaningful questionnaire or survey. So it's often good to have an interview that's not necessarily structured. So structured would be the one that has all the questions lined up ahead of the interview and you try to sort of stick to them, versus unstructured interview where you would ask a person a general question like the one that Jeremiah asked me during the break. How did I make it into psychology? All right. There's no way that one could come up with a set of structured questions to ask somebody. And if you are thinking about a career in psychology, I would suggest you have a short interview with people who teach you in various courses, in various psychology courses, and ask them how they decided to be psychologists, what was their way. And you'd be surprised how many different answers you're going to get. People's stories are fascinating. Okay. So, of course, you have to be very careful when you have multiple choice answers in closed-ended questions. You're not going to ask something like, on a scale of 1 to 5,000, how would you rate this class? Yay, you guys should say at 5,000, right? And finally, once you have your questions there, you need a pilot. Now, you will see the word pilot coming from me today and Thursday and next week, because you want to give both your survey and observation, either of the two, or experiment, any method, you want to give it a quick run first to see if it delivers. And that's called pilot. Pilot means 1 or 2 participants. So if you're doing a survey, you're going to just give your 10-question survey to a couple of people and see what they do. If you're doing an observation, you're going to go out to wherever you're doing observation and you're going to select a couple of people and observe them. And this is pilot. And remember that for you, for your assignment 2, you need to do 10 participants per person in your group. So if your group is 3, which I hope everybody will be, that means you have to collect 30 observations. Or if you're doing a survey, you have to have 30 respondents. That will allow you to refine your questions and make sure people are not confused. You give them your form if it's live and they are like, I don't know what you want me to do. That means that you haven't done your pilot properly. And we always try to put the more important questions first and stuff like how old you are and whatever else at the end, because it doesn't require any cognitive skills to answer. This is easy. How do you administer? In the old days, phone and mail were the preferred methods. Now it is almost exclusively internet, especially with COVID. Even our data collection in real experiments is now all on online platforms, except for things like working with babies. That's hard. Or doing eye movements in my case. So we do other things. And you can, again, this is just a summary of how you would work with your final survey or questionnaire. You would go through these questions and look at your questions and see whether you've done it all properly. Are your questions good? Are they clear? Will people be willing to answer them or will they cheat? Have you done what you have to do with getting rid of negations and double-barreled and leading wording? Have you taken care of social desirability? Will people be willing to talk to you honestly about sensitive issues? And so on. I just want to finish in the remaining 2 minutes with one. Let's go through this. One question to, again, remind you how you should go about answering multiple choice questions. So type in your answer in the chat. And once we get the right answer, the class will be over. So here's the question. In developing a measure of need for cognition, a trait that describes the degree to which people like thinking and problem solving, Dr. Jonathan asks his participants to rate their agreement with the following statement. I frequently solve and enjoy solving crossword puzzles and Sudoku puzzles. What is the problem with this question? Okay, Siri says there is not a measurement to rate. No, it's not about measurement. It's about the way the question is worded. Double-barreled. Yes, Jeremiah. Ding, 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 ding. Correct answer. And if you were to then go to the actual multiple choice question, right? If you did not look, if you covered the answers with a piece of paper, you would then select a double-barreled question because you already answered it. Okay, guys, at this point, the class is over. I'll see you all on Thursday.